There's a reason why some people can enter a room and immediately, without raising their voice, without introducing themselves, without trying to dominate, shift the energy of the entire space. And while others desperately try to be heard, desperately try to be liked, desperately try to be noticed, they fade into the background, they get ignored, and they leave without ever creating an impact. And this difference is not about status, not about money, not about social popularity. It is about presence. And presence is built not by what you say, but by what you don't say. And when we look back at history, when we look at the thinkers who studied power, who analyzed influence, who stripped away the illusions of human behavior and exposed the raw truth of control, one name always rises above the rest, and that name is Niccolò Machiavelli, the Italian political philosopher who understood more than anyone else that the foundation of influence is not in loudness, but in silence, not in kindness, but in unpredictability, not in being liked, but in being respected and, most importantly, in being feared in just the right way. Now, when I say fear, I don't mean violence, I don't mean cruelty, I don't mean aggression, because that kind of fear burns quickly, it leaves scars, but it also leaves rebellion, and rebellion eventually destroys the power that created it. But Machiavelli spoke of a deeper kind of fear, the silent fear, the psychological fear, the fear that grows not because of what you do, but because of what you could do, because of what they imagine you might do, because of the unknown edge you keep hidden from them. And if you want to command respect, if you want to move through the world in such a way that people pause before they speak to you, that people measure their tone when they address you, that people hesitate before disrespecting you, then you must learn what Machiavelli already knew, that silence is not weakness. Silence is not emptiness. Silence is not absence. Silence is a weapon. Silence is presence. Silence is power waiting in the shadows, and when it is used with precision, it can change everything. Think about your own life for a moment. Think about the times when people ignored you, talked over you, dismissed your boundaries, demanded more than they gave, treated you as if you were always available, always forgiving, always soft, always explainable, always predictable. And now think about the rare times when you stepped back, when you stopped explaining, when you stopped chasing, when you became quiet, when you didn't react. And suddenly, they noticed your absence. Suddenly, they asked questions. Suddenly, they tried to win back your attention. Suddenly, your silence carried more weight than all your words ever could. This is the paradox of human psychology. The more predictable you are, the more controllable you become. And the more mysterious you are, the more powerful you appear. And Machiavelli understood this so well that he turned it into a strategy that allowed him to survive in one of the most cutthroat political landscapes of all time, a world where alliances shifted overnight, where loyalty was bought and sold like currency, where betrayal was always one step away. And yet, the ones who mastered silence, the ones who revealed less, the ones who remained unreadable, were the ones who not only survived but thrived. So how do you bring this into your life today, in a modern world that may not have castles and armies, but still has politics in the office, still has competition in relationships, still has games of power in every social circle, still has people testing your boundaries just to see if you'll bend? The first principle is this: never show your entire hand. The loud ones, the ones who always need to be seen, the ones who overshare their plans, who reveal their insecurities, who wear their emotions on their sleeves, they make themselves vulnerable, they become predictable, they become readable, and once someone can read you, they can manipulate you, they can calculate you, they can move you like a piece on their chessboard. But when you keep parts of yourself hidden, when you reveal only what you choose to reveal, when you hold back your deepest emotions and your truest intentions, you force people into uncertainty, and uncertainty is the breeding ground of fear. Imagine you're in a conversation. Someone criticizes you, someone tries to trigger you, someone expects you to defend yourself. But instead of rushing to explain, instead of justifying, instead of proving yourself, you remain calm, you nod, you smile faintly, and you say nothing. And in that moment, the power shifts, because if you defend, you confirm weakness. But if you remain still, if you remain unreadable, you plant doubt in their mind. You force them to question what you're thinking, and that psychological pause, that silence, makes them hesitate the next time. The second principle is unpredictability. Human beings fear what they cannot predict. And this is why Machiavelli often changed his approach. Sometimes praising an ally and then replacing him the next day. Sometimes showing kindness and then vanishing without explanation. Sometimes smiling during conversation and then delivering silence the next week. And what this created was not chaos for him, but stability. Because people never felt safe enough to disrespect him. They never felt confident enough to play games with him. Because they didn't know which version of him they would get. And that unpredictability became his armor. Now apply this to your world. Don't always be available. Don't always respond the same way. Don't always explain yourself. Sometimes say less. Sometimes disappear for a while. Sometimes smile when they expect you to argue. Sometimes remain calm when they expect you to break. Because inconsistency, when used with precision, creates a kind of psychological submission. It makes people treat you with caution. It makes people respect you. It makes people fear testing you, not because of what you've done, but because of what they imagine you might do. The third principle is composure. In a world full of noise, in a world full of people rushing to react, rushing to speak, rushing to prove themselves, the person who remains composed, who stays calm when others panic, who smiles slightly when others insult, who speaks slowly when others yell, becomes magnetic, becomes intimidating, becomes powerful, because composure signals one thing: control. And control is the ultimate form of dominance. When you are unshaken, when you refuse to escalate, when you remain calm in the face of chaos, you send a message without saying a word, and that message is this: if you can't move me emotionally, you can't move me at all. And if you can't move me, then I am the one who decides when to move, and that stillness, that self-control makes people orbit you. It makes them cautious. It makes them fear losing your presence. The fourth principle is scarcity. Think about the dog, always present, always loyal, always waiting, always available. And then think about the wolf, appear when he chooses, disappear without explanation. And because he is scarce, his presence carries weight. His absence carries meaning. His movements shift the energy. And this is how you must train your presence. Don't overappear. Don't make yourself too common. Don't be in every conversation. Don't always reply instantly. Don't attend every argument. Because when you're always there, your presence loses value. But when you appear rarely, strategically, intentionally, your presence becomes precious. Your presence becomes feared. Your presence becomes respected. And here's where psychology enters again. When you withdraw, people notice. When you say less, people overthink. When you don't reply, people reflect. When you don't show up, people feel the weight of your absence. And suddenly, you are no longer just a person. You are a consequence, and consequences are feared more than people. Machiavelli understood this centuries ago, and it still applies today, maybe even more, because in today's world, everyone is trying to be loud, everyone is trying to be seen, everyone is trying to be liked, but in that chaos, the one who is quiet, the one who is unreadable, the one who is scarce, becomes unforgettable. The greatest illusion of power is that it must always be expressed loudly, that it must always be obvious, that it must always announce itself with a roar. But history shows us again and again that the most enduring power is quiet, subtle, invisible. And that is why those who truly understand influence never rush to prove themselves, never rush to reveal their strength, never rush to speak just to be heard, because they know that real dominance is not measured by how much noise you make, but by how carefully others adjust their noise in your presence. When you walk into a room, the difference between being ignored and being respected lies in one simple detail: anticipation. If people anticipate your words, anticipate your reaction, anticipate your movement, then you already hold influence. But if they don't notice when you arrive, don't notice when you leave, don't measure themselves against your silence, then you are invisible, and invisibility is the greatest enemy of respect. So, how do you build anticipation without announcing yourself? You do it by controlling your visibility, by mastering your energy, by deciding deliberately what parts of yourself you reveal and what parts you withhold, and by understanding that in a Machiavellian world, the greatest power is not in being loved, but in being calculated, not in being predictable, but in being unreadable, and not in being open, but in being opaque. Let's imagine a situation you've experienced many times. Someone disrespects you. Maybe they interrupt you in a meeting. Maybe they mock you in front of friends. Maybe they demand more of your time than they give back. And the natural instinct is to respond immediately, to defend yourself, to explain, to justify, to prove that you won't tolerate it. But here's where silence changes everything, because the moment you explain, you hand them proof that they still have emotional access to you, that they can still reach inside your mind, trigger a reaction, and manipulate your energy. But the moment you do nothing, the moment you remain still, the moment you look them in the eye and say less than they expect, you shift the balance of control. And suddenly, they're the one who feels exposed. This is not just philosophy. This is psychology. Human beings fear what they cannot read. When someone yells and you yell back, the exchange is predictable. When someone mocks you and you defend yourself, the cycle is predictable. When someone pushes and you immediately push back, the game is balanced, and balance means no one truly has upper hand. But when someone insults you and you smile slightly, when someone pressures you and you go silent, when someone expects explanation and you offer none, then the mind of the other person spirals into overthinking, into doubt, into fear of what you might be thinking. And that uncertainty is what creates respect. Because respect is not born from what you do. It is born from what they believe you might do. Machiavelli saw this principle in politics, but you can see it in your personal life every day. Think about the friend who always explains themselves, who always apologizes first, who always softens every conflict, who always forgives quickly, who always makes themselves emotionally available. Over time, do they get respected more or less? The answer is less. Because the more they reveal, the more they forgive, the more predictable they become. And predictability is the death of respect. Now think about the person who never explains too much, who listens more than they speak, who doesn't respond immediately to provocation, who is sometimes warm and sometimes distant. And notice how others tread carefully around them. Notice how others second-guess their tone. Notice how others try harder to win their approval. That is presence. That is silent power. That is the Machiavellian strategy of influence and action. Now, let's dig deeper into the mechanics of this presence. Step 1. Never show your entire hand. The first and most important lesson is that power is not in what you show. It is in what you hide. Loud people reveal everything. They show their ambition. They show their insecurities. They show their strategies. They reveal their emotional triggers. And by doing this, they give others a map on how to defeat them. When you know exactly what drives a person, you know exactly how to manipulate them. This is why Machiavelli taught opacity. To be opaque is to be unreadable. To keep your motives wrapped in fog. To let others wonder about your true thoughts. And by doing so, you force them to prepare for the worst. Imagine playing cards with someone who shows their hand openly on the table. You never fear them. You never respect them. You simply calculate around them. But imagine playing against someone who never reveals, who sits quietly, who lets you guess whether they hold power or not. And suddenly, every move you make feels heavier, because you don't know if one mistake could destroy you. That's the principle of hidden strength. In your daily life, this means stop oversharing. Stop telling people your every plan. Stop revealing your insecurities in the hope of sympathy. Stop explaining yourself when silence would carry more weight. Every time you reveal, you reduce your power, but every time you hold back, you increase it. Step 2, don't defend, don't explain. The second principle is perhaps the hardest, because it goes against human instinct. When someone criticizes you, the natural urge is to explain, to defend, to prove them wrong. But Machiavelli understood that nothing destroys the illusion of strength faster than defensiveness. If you defend yourself, you admit that the attack mattered. If you explain yourself, you admit that their opinion has power over you. Instead, you must learn the art of blank response. If someone calls you distant, don't defend your silence. If someone calls you cold, don't explain your composure. If someone mocks you, don't argue. Simply nod, smile faintly, and say less than they expect. Because in that silence, in that refusal to explain, you signal that their opinion is irrelevant, that their attempt to trigger you has failed, that they cannot reach you. And once people realize they cannot reach you emotionally, they begin to fear you. Because emotional access is a tool most people use to control others. Take that tool away, and suddenly, they don't know how to move you anymore. Step 3, become unpredictable. The third principle is unpredictability. Consistency is comforting. When people know exactly how you will react, they feel safe. They know the boundaries, they know the rules, they know the cost. But when your reactions are sometimes warm, sometimes distant, sometimes soft, sometimes silent, you create psychological instability, and that instability forces caution. This doesn't mean you should be chaotic or irrational. It means you should avoid patterns that make you too easy to read. Sometimes show kindness, then disappear without explanation. Sometimes respond with silence, then with sharpness. Sometimes offer attention, then withdraw it. The goal is not cruelty, but uncertainty, because uncertainty creates respect, and respect creates influence. Step 4, master composure. The fourth principle is composure, and this is the essence of intimidation. Most people, when faced with gossip, panic, chaos, or insult, lose control. They rush to defend themselves. They rush to prove their worth. They rush to fight for their image. But the person who stays still, who remains calm, who speaks slowly, who blinks slowly, who doesn't escalate, becomes untouchable. Imagine two people arguing loudly in public, throwing words, raising voices, and then imagine a third person silent, calm, watching, smiling faintly, saying almost nothing. Which one do people notice? Which one do they respect? Which one do they fear? Always the calm one, because composure in chaos signals something terrifying: control. If you can remain calm when everyone else loses control, then you hold a power they don't understand. And what people don't understand, they fear. Step 5, use scarcity. The final principle is scarcity. The dog is always present, always loyal, always available. The wolf appears rarely, strategically, and every time he disappears, his absence is felt. To create presence, you must learn to withdraw. Leave before your presence becomes normal. Say less before your words lose weight. Step away from conversations before they consume your energy. When you appear too often, you become forgettable. When you appear rarely, you become unforgettable. And this is the paradox that Machiavelli mastered. Silence is louder than noise, absence is heavier than presence, and unreadability is more powerful than clarity.